Greetings, I'm Les Pollard, president of Oakwood University, and welcome to Oakwood Praise. Today we are continuing our discussion on the subject of grief. In the context of this coronavirus, when there is so much suffering and death, and when the numbers keep spiraling upward around those who are afflicted with the disease as well as those who have succumbed to it, it's important for us to be able to process the grief that we feel, both for ourselves, our families, and our loved ones, as well as those that we hear about. And so today we're with Mr. John Ruffin, who works in our health and counseling services sector of the institution. He is also a counselor. He assists students and employees in working their way through some of the mental health challenges, some of the emotional issues that just come to all of us as we navigate this thing called life. John, welcome this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back.
We're glad that you are back, and I was so blessed by what you shared before. But there were some things that you shared around the book of Job that I thought were just so helpful. And for our listeners who didn't hear last week, could you kind of walk us through a little bit of the book of Job and the role that grief plays within that ancient story?
Sure. You see a man who has experienced a tremendous amount of loss. You know, loss of his children, loss of his livestock, his livelihood, you know, even the loss of his connections with his friends looking for help. Even his wife, rejected, gave him a sense of loss with her rejection of God in some kind of way. So he's dealing with all of this, and he's trying to maintain his sanity. Mm-hmm. And so it's amazing how in this story, the things he pulled on to maintain his connection, not only with God, but with his reality. Mm-hmm. So you have several characters. You have his wife, who's dealing with her own grief. She lost her children, her status, and a host of other things. And
do you know,
she's
John,
angry.
why we read past her? We often read past her grief, don't we?
We do.
When we study the Bible. We focus on Job's grief because obviously he's a central character in the story. But why do you think we read past her grief?
You know, I think there is such a rawness to her grief. It hits us in such a place that's so raw that we can't really handle it. We know it to be true.
Yeah.
If it was us, we probably would feel the same way. But we hope that we wouldn't. So we try to move past it so that we don't really reflect on how relatable she is.
Yes, yes.
She is so relatable in our humanistic view. Mm-hmm. You know, anytime we feel wronged or we feel like there's too much to bear, you know, one of our responses is anger, frustration. You know,
I wish we felt more empathy towards her. You know, it's only as we've been talking about this, I thought about the fact that, as you pointed out last week, that the children were their children, not just Job's children.
Sure.
So she lost her 7 sons.
That's right.
And her 3 daughters.
Yes.
All at once.
Yes.
Imagine 7 caskets at the front of the church. 10 caskets in a service where you got 10 caskets in front of the church. Mm-hmm. And a grieving widow with a broken heart.
Sure.
Empathy.
Sure.
Empathy for her.
Yes. And so you have her as a character, and you have Job's friends as a character. Yes. Though they tried to bring comfort, their own needs got in the way. Their own needs to understand what's happening.
Can that happen to you and me?
Sure.
I need to know.
Sure. I mean, before I could help you, you know, as a young counselor.
Okay, so your car was repossessed. So now, forget that you're grieving about the car going, I can't get to work. How did that happen?
Sure. That's my.
What did you not do?
That's my first response. You know, as a young counselor, I used to make this mistake all the time.
Really?
Someone would come in and they would tell me something that was really interesting. and I would
And you take
grab,
off on
I
that.
grab at low hanging fruit, because it was
We all
just
do
so
that.
interesting. It just had to be valuable. So I would grab for it, and I'm telling you, every time it would backfire because it'd take me that much longer to get to the heart of the matter.
Really? So that other thing was a distraction from the real concern that brought the client to you.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, it
Interesting.
is. It's kind of like the difference between, you know how some people come in and remodel a house? Some people who are trying to be really, really quick, they'll just throw stuff over the existing problem.
Right.
You know, instead of, really fixing the heart of the matter, they'll just throw a rug over it or carpet over it. Oh, this floor is messed up, so let me just carpet it.
Yeah. Right.
But some people who come in and remodel understand that you have to start with the foundation.
Wow.
And so they'll go in and they will, before they lay flooring, they'll level out the floor. They'll fix any imperfections. They'll remove mold, and they will cut out old rotten joists, and they will do the work you'll never see.
Not the pretty part.
Not the pretty
Not
part.
the pretty part.
They'll spend a lot of time on stuff you will never see so that what you do see works well.
Wow.
And
You know
so-
something? I fear that I just did what you talked about. How you go off on something. You were telling us about the characters in the story.
Sure.
Remember, I started talking about something else.
Sure.
So the
Man,
characters: Job, his wife, the friends.
correct.
Okay.
And then you have what Job used to stay sane, stay connected with God, stay focused. We talked about monuments, having something that you can look to that reminded you of where you've come from and what you've experienced and what you've been through. We talked about using pictures of loved ones and also events that they may have done or connections they may have had to remind you of the good that times you've had with the person that you may have lost. We talked about just dealing with processing what you've been through as well. And we'll talk a little more about that. But I was telling you, I think the main thing I wanted to say was making sure that you do that with the professional. I just want to reiterate that it's so important that you have someone who you can process information from and check, make sure reality is reality.
Well, one of the things we'll do in our next broadcast is have you talk a little bit about what constitutes the training of a mental health professional and a counselor. That's important because if we demystify the process, then maybe it would be more attractive to many people, because often we don't understand, right? We don't understand it, therefore we fear what we don't understand.
Correct.
So you were talking about grief and processing that grief. Now, what happens if grief is unprocessed?
Okay, so this is a great question. And the best way I can answer, I want to go back to my illustration. We'll do a working illustration of a home.
Okay.
We're going to compare your mind like a home.
Okay.
So when you have a home, new construction, everything is perfect, right? So imagine being as a child. You are an empty new construction. And your job is to start filling your home with the things that will make it a home, furniture, pictures, decorations, whatever it may be. So unprocessed grief is kind of like a stain. When I was growing up, anytime we as kids, there was 4 of us in the house, and we're all kind of close in age. So imagine 4 kids running around. We're going to make spills from time to time. Imagine making a spill on a carpet. Now, for my mom, that was like the world stopped.
Wow.
So
Wow.
immediately,
That was her good carpet. Apparently.
Yes.
The older people talk about stuff being good. That's my good, boy, don't sit on that. That's my good furniture, my good carpet.
So as soon as she hears there was a spill, she goes to start making her concoction. a little bit of 409, a little bit of Pine Sol, a little bit of hot water, whatever it may be, and then she's going to scrubbing as quick as she can. And I didn't understand. I'm like, why are you panicking? It's just a stain. It's It's just a spill, it's an accident. But what happens is sometimes we have these situations where we have an experience like grief, comparing it to a stain, and we don't go clean it right away. What happens when you leave stain on a carpet for a long period of time?
It becomes more permanent. It
does.
embeds.
It starts to sink in.
Starts to sink in.
It does. And so what ends up happening is eventually you might want to clean that stain, but it doesn't quite go away. You might try to clean it on your own, in your own way, through your own methods, or even try to go get help and get it clean, but it's a little bit more difficult to clean it. Imagine if you're the type of person, though, who allow multiple stains.
Wow.
And multiple damage to your house. You neglect it. You don't clean like you should on a regular basis. You don't allow, you allow people to just kind of trample in your house however they want to. I have an aunt who's OCD.
She cleans all the time.
I probably in my lifetime have been to her house twice. Just for the simple fact that she is a clean freak. I mean, it's so bad she vacuums her way out of her house.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness.
And I'm not saying go to that extent, but we have to be vigilant in what affects our mental health. We have to be vigilant.
And what we'll do is in our next section we'll talk about the things that affect our mental health. As we get ready to conclude this segment, we want to thank you, of course, for tuning in. And when we return after this special selection, you'll have a moment to talk about and to listen to the very things that Mr. Ruffin is pointing out to us in his counseling practice, in his training, that can help us navigate some of the challenges that we face and actually steward better our mental health. We'll see you in just a few.
I shall not fear the arrow by day, nor shall I fear the terror by night. The God who governs angel armies has set encampments around me. Shall I fear? protection around me. His army is all around me. So who shall I fear?
So we're back here at Oakwood Praise, and we're talking with Mr. John Ruffin, who is a counselor. I always call him Counselor John Ruffin because he does so much good for so many students and employees on our campus. John, we're talking about grief in this segment and how we can, the effect that grief has on the mind, the heart, and how we can better steward our mental state and our mental outlook. What would you suggest are ways that we can do that? But first, how do we process grief so that we're in a position that we can even manage those other stresses that we talked about?
So unprocessed grief can turn into many different disorders. One of the two that we notice a lot that happens is depression and anxiety. The APA, American Psychological Association, identified depression as this sense of disconnect or loss or sadness that happens due to not stigma, but different types of information that comes into us that we take negatively.
So how do I know when my sadness is circumstantial and maybe I shouldn't use this word with a counselor, normal? Within the normal range? My sadness is within a range of normal. And when it's not there and I'm actually depressed.
So we have a standard that we go by, 6 months of this continual feeling of sadness, and it's impeding on your everyday function of life.
Okay.
Then we start going into the realm of depression.
So 6 months?
6 months.
That's a long time.
It is.
Wow.
It is. So 3 to 6 months, but 6 months is the ultimate standard. Now, it's interesting to note
But
that
it's sadness that impedes my regular functioning.
regular functioning.
Because we can carry a nagging sadness about something. I lost my puppy, or whatever. And there's a sadness. When I think about them, I feel sad.
But I'm
That-
able
that's
to
not what
process
you're talking
the-
about.
No,
That's not what you're talking about.
I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
This type of depression happens where it's affecting your everyday life. There's things that you maybe avoid or don't deal with.
I can't get out of the bed.
Can't get out of the bed, or don't want to go to work, or I can't get excited about work. I lose interest in things that I used to do, that I used to find love to do, or find interesting or enjoyable. And when that's happening, those are the signs of depression.
And behind that, you say, is often unprocessed grief.
A lot of times.
A lot of times.
A lot of times. Because grief is loss. There's many different types of grief. You have grief, a loss from a loved one, but loss of a job, loss of identity, loss of friendships, loss of security. Imagine coming home and your home is broken into. Now all of a sudden your security that you thought you have is gone. And so that's a lot of things that can cause grief. And that's why depression can be seen a lot through not dealing with grief.
Oh, okay. So then, excuse my sinuses, but in terms of unprocessed grief, then it's managing loss and the role that it plays. Now, is every life going to experience some loss? I mean, what do you think? All of us are going to experience, so here's my premise. My premise is all of us are going to experience loss.
Exactly.
With the emergence of sin in the world, because we believe Genesis 1 and 2, Adam and Eve, they lost their home, if nothing else, right? Just start there, right? They lost their standing, they lost their state. But depression grows out of that when I don't process it. What does it mean to process it then?
Sure.
So let's go to the positive. What does it mean to process loss?
So let me try to answer your first question, and then we'll go there.
Okay.
So I was looking at some statistics just today. 1 in 15 people will experience grief and loss.
Okay.
But 1 in 6 will experience in their lifetime depression.
Really?
So yes, does it impact us? Oh, definitely. And we all will at some point experience it and may have to deal with it in our lifetime. So that was an interesting statistic that I saw. But you asked a good question, how do we process or how we deal with grief?
Yeah, on the positive, how do we?
On a positive note. So there's 5 schools of thought when it comes to dealing with any disorder. So you have the psychodynamics, you have cognitive approach, you have the behavioral approach, you have a biological approach, and then you have a humanistic approach. Now, when we process any kind
I'd be curious to hear each one of those elaborated upon. I know we don't have time, but I'd be curious about each one of those and what they actually mean in terms of implementation. Right?
Sure. So when we typically process any dysfunction, especially grief, we usually do it when we're doing it on our own. We usually start with the cognitive behavioral approach. What behaviors can I change or what can I do? So if we go back to our working scenario of the house and the stain, this may mean, okay, I'm gonna clean this old stain or I'm gonna throw a rug over it. But that alone isn't enough. And so then what we tend to do is we go to the biological approach, which could be, for us, could be like medicine or, we say, okay, I can self-medicate. So some people use drugs and alcohol to deal with it. So in our working scenario here in the house, it could just be, okay, I know this floor is messed up, so I'm gonna just throw a rug over it. New carpet over it and make it look pretty. Then we might go to the humanistic approach. I'm just gonna accept this is who I am.
I'm strong.
We
or
see
whatever.
this in our society.
Yeah.
Our norm has changed. The things we considered normal wasn't normal 20 years ago.
Can you give an example? Anyone.
I can give
Well,
the one that pops to my head the most though is, let's say, sexuality. And a lot of people will argue this point, but do you know maybe about 30, 40 years ago, homosexuality was a part of the DSM-4.
It was.
The DSM-3 at the time, as a disorder. Can you imagine nowadays that being in the DSM?
Well, I know. It would never survive.
It would never survive.
One that I think is becoming normal, unfortunately, and we'll see it for the next generation. I used to wonder why, John, and I'll illustrate it. So narcissism.
Yes.
Narcissism today,
Yes.
it can look like self-care and self-belief, especially when it's coming from the highest places in the land.
Sure.
There is some person who will believe that this is the way you navigate society.
Sure.
Because of narcissism and self-love and self-involvement and all those other
Yes.
obsessive self-engagements like that.
Yes.
And one of the things that I noticed in the Bible, often we would get hard on the Bible, and the Bible would say, go in and clean out everything, right? People would get all upset. But when you look at how many of the dysfunctions and the immoralities of a society are transmitted,
That's right.
they're transmitted through a lowering of our defenses. Do you agree? Do you
I
agree?
agree
And so it becomes
wholeheartedly.
normal. It's something now, you say, well, why wouldn't that be normal? Why wouldn't it be?
And the reason we do that is because we have lost sight of how to correct it. So if I can't correct it, let me just accept it. And so now we're putting in work to just get to a place where everything is acceptable.
Yes.
Let me accept it. This is just human nature. This is who we are. This is how life can be. Now, this to me is probably one of the most detrimental things that's going on in our society right now, is this pull and drive to just accept dysfunction, make it normalized.
So as a counselor, you're saying this is not normal. We need to not accept dysfunction.
No, not at all. Right is right. We should never get to a place where we start calling dysfunction normal, because then you really get to a place where it's hard to fix a structure. So going back to the home as a structure, there's times where a house can be remodeled, but then there's a time where you have to destroy the whole house.
Exactly.
Now, Now, so there's been, if we want to look at it biblically, there's been
There-
an
there've been
example
examples
where
where
God was like, okay, you know what? We just got to destroy the whole house.
Saul, he said, go into Canaan and clear it out completely.
Yeah.
Don't take anything. Don't keep anything.
Achan.
Achan, yeah.
You know, so there are examples
Because
where you have to
generationalized
just
dysfunction is so embedded
so embedded.
that normal cannot be conceived
Yes.
as anything other than that.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So as a
That's what I hear you
counselor,
saying.
though, and I'm just using my approach. Counselors can look at it different ways,
sure.
and most people subscribe to one principle, not all. But I'm more eclectic. I'm gonna subscribe to all. I think there's benefits in all of these.
But as a believer, which ones, as we have 2 minutes left, as a believer, which ones do you go to, and which ones have you found to be most helpful to clients?
Okay.
Coming from your framework of belief, not imposing it on anyone, but recognizing it is a legitimate framework too. How do you?
Man, that is such a tough question to answer. I'll tell you this. I believe in the whole self, physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual self. I think we have to take care of our spiritual connection. And it's an important part, but it's not the only part. You know, it's an important part, but not the only part. We have to take care of all of us. It's almost like when Jesus saw the 5,000, he fed them first before he preached to them.
Yes.
Because physiologically, it's hard to hear someone spiritually when you're hungry.
Right.
We have 5 basic needs. Our most deepest need is our need to physiologically be okay. Then safety, then love, then accomplishment, then self-actualization. And that's your spiritual plane. So we want to take care of everything. When we come back, I would love to express the approach from a therapeutic point of view of a healthy avenue to process grief.
And we are eager to hear that. And you have been with us on Oakwood Praise. John Ruffin has opened up to us new ways of understanding how to keep ourselves healthy during this time, not just physically healthy, but also spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically healthy. We'll see you next time when we'll pick this topic up again on the Christian and mental health, how we process grief, and how we stay well in a society that often challenges our best interests. May God bless you, and thank you for tuning in.